1844, The Great Disappointment. And today, I didn't know what icon to use for 2024, so I just used that. And the arc is a very traditional Adventist graphical technique to show a span of years. It's been 180 years. And the literature that I've been looking at is full of almost here, it won't be long now, it really can't last long now, the end is in sight. All these expressions of immediacy of the second coming. And I wish I could move this someplace else. And my opinion is that the Adventist Church cannot credibly sustain the sense of urgency for over 180 years. And we'll unpack that a bit. October 1844 was 180 years ago. Ellen White died 109 years ago. The start of World War II was 85 years ago. And things in the Adventist Church have really changed. Doctrine, ideas, culture, community, the processes we use to accomplish our goals, the polity and policies, how we treat employees, the treatment of women, and institutions have evolved tremendously. I'll look at that a little more. Here is 1857, 167 years ago, and a lead article in the review is that the end is near, 167 years ago. Why talk about historic Adventism? Most members today are ignorant of our roots and our history. And is that relevant for today? And I maintain that it is, because modern Adventists, including GC leadership, are locked into or many Adventists are locked into a tradition and a nostalgia for the past, or at least their past. Some traditions and historic processes may be irrelevant in today's world. The environment outside the church has changed, and we need to decide what to keep and what to discard. I'm going to use the word orthodox an awful lot instead of religious conservative. Uh, I would define it as adherence to voted doctrine, values, and worldview, kind of a top down concept. Some religious conservatives embrace extreme positions, such as the inerrancy of Ellen White and distrust of science. And then secular or political conservatives are outside the church, but very dominant in American society right now. And that they do have an influence. And in Adventism, right-wing ideas find resonance with traditional Adventist paranoia. I think I've talked about that before. I can't remember if it was to this group or another. Um, this is a wonderful model that is not original with me, and there are many versions of it. But my first familiarity with it was apparently at a Saturday night social at a faculty home in La Sierra about 35, 40 years ago. They created this model to obviously show that Adventism is not uniform across the membership. And I've renamed some of the categories. Mainstream Orthodox are both Adventist, and I'm not going to read all these characteristics. You can read them, but these are the pillars of the church, the essential people that keep the congregations running. And then there are the passive Orthodox that are more liberal. In Loma Linda, there are hundreds of people that are in this category. They work for the church, but they don't attend. They work for the institution, but they don't attend services. And then someone suggested coastal liberal, but I'll stick with California liberal. Is way on the left. And then the ultra conservative or the primitive Adventists, where Ellen White's writings are verbally inerrant and they have strict Sabbath rules, strict vegetarians, strong support of our schools, unless they are into homeschooling. And I know a lot of conservatives. They're worried about sin and salvation, and they're very judgmental of other people. So if I were to estimate a distribution of these groups, I would say maybe 3% are in the liberal group. But if you look at how much money is coming in, most of it's coming in through the active mainstream Orthodox group. And so if we could linearize Orthodoxy, and of course we can't, there are a lot of different uh, doctrines, but if we could linearize it, I think there would be a curve something like that. And actually, Amy Leuchert, who is at the La Sierra School of Education, did her dissertation at Claremont University, where she tried to find a single method of or metric of orthodoxy in Adventist membership. All these groups generally coexist in the modern church, and particularly in urban areas. And there's only conflict at board and committee meetings and occasionally across families. But the differences were not consequential until 5 years ago and the COVID-19 pandemic. And then some differences came. The vulnerability to conspiracy, and I'm drawing curves just intuitively here throughout the presentation. A lot of the people on the right were vulnerable to conspiracy, and understandable because they distrust government and they distrust modern science, peer-reviewed science. They distrust mainstream media, and they're obsessed with signs of the end and the apocalypse. So that's the distribution. But in any individual, where they fit on any particular doctrine or behavioral rule can be quite different. And so nobody is solidly in any one of these columns. And these different theological packages coexist in the same congregation. And to keep the peace, we don't talk about our differences, especially over the Thanksgiving table. I am going to be talking only about North America, particularly the United States. There is so much more to learn about Adventism in the rest of the world, but I'm not an expert on that. Ron Lawson knows more about that than I do. If we look at Adventist history, and I put the lifespan of Ellen White up there, at least her religious lifespan, it of course starts with a great disappointment, and temperance emerged in the late 1850s. The General Conference was organized in 1863 during the Civil War. Jay and Andrews went to Europe in 1874. The 1888 GC session was an opportunity to embrace justification by faith. Down in the South, the Morning Star boat was launched and started its ministry just before 1900. In 1901, there was a major reorganization and the union conferences were formed. And shortly thereafter, you had the union papers, the Gleaners, the Southern Tidings, and things like that. Over a long span of time, the Battle Creek Sanitarium was very influential. In fact, the centroid of Adventism was at Battle Creek for a long time. My little fire icon represents the burning. The 1919 Bible Conference was another opportunity to be candid about the role of Ellen White in the church, and they shrunk away from the opportunity. Questions on doctrines came in the late 1950s. The big solidification of Adventist doctrines was in Dallas in 1980. I was there, but was not involved in that. Up until 1900, our theology influenced the nature of community and eventually the nature of our institutions. After 1919, institutional survival constrained theology. I think that's my opinion. And part of it was due to economics. The church must keep growing to pay for the sustentation of the retired folk. But that became less important more recently when the Adventist retirement plan was reorganized and refunded, and it became more actuarially sound. But Adventism has always suffered from a short planning horizon because if were absolutely convinced that Christ was coming next year, we would do a lot of debt financing of our institutions because we'll never have to pay it back. So, how do I measure and detect change? I'm doing a survey. I've been doing it for 5 years of early Adventist journals, and they were very candid and detailed in their discussion of everything that was going on. And I think I've talked to this group before about the obituaries, which tell us a lot about grassroots theology. The published metrics began after 1899, but sometimes they're not reliable because they rely upon conferences and unions to fill out the forms and report their statistics. We have to remember that anecdotes are not overall trends, and the challenge for the historian is using the detail and the grain of all that we know to construct overall trends, and that's what I'm trying to do today. So if you look at the sheer volume of data available, um, in the GC Archives website, there's 1.5 million unique pages of journals. About 151 million sermons have been preached over the history of Adventism, including 10 million funeral services. Um, and in the Review and Herald alone, I would estimate 120 million words over 180 years, which is 3 times the volume of the Encyclopedia Britannica. So there's a lot of stuff out there. And because there's so much, and because much of it is unregulated, we see an emergence of uncontrolled popular theology. And I don't think I've talked to this group about that, but that is a 1 hour topic because some of that pop theology is hurtful. Um, so the uh, the easily available data is on a general conference archive server, and we can get the images of the journals in a PDF file, and I can look at them without putting on any shoes or socks from home. But then uh, the files, the statements, and records are in closets and vaults and basements of conference offices and institutions all over the country. And this is the original raw data, but it's not easily accessible. Sometimes one must deduce reality from clues, but there's risk to doing that. For example, in the 1950 SDA yearbook, in the entry for the College of Medical Evangelists, there was when they list all the faculty, there's a very interesting entry for Seventh-day Adventist faculty. Well, the whole school is a Seventh-day Adventist institution, but so why did they have to put in Seventh-day Adventist faculty? Probably because there were non-Adventist faculty already involved in the College of Medical Evangelists. One of them was Niels Jorgensen, our family dentist when I grew up. Never joined the Adventist church, but was very supportive of the institution. So non-Adventist faculty don't get ministerial licenses and therefore are not listed in the yearbook. I keep discovering new connections personally to the history of Adventism. Here is an announcement in 1851 for a conference of the Brethren in Camden, New York, at the house of Brother Chandler B. Preston. Now, Camden, New York is a long way from Paris, Maine, where James White was editing the Review and Herald. But Chandler B. Preston, this is my family tree, is my great, great, great grandfather. And just 2 months ago, in a box in the back of the garage, I found his photograph, he and his wife. His obituary was authored in the review in 1891 by Frederick Wheeler. So I have a number of connections, family connections to early Adventism. Now, uh, one of the problems that Lauren alluded to is that while this is many people's view of the growth of membership in the Adventist Church, there are other metrics that offer a warning. One is the decline in baptisms per 100 members, and that's been a steady decline for the last, oh my goodness, 100 years. Another is the annualized membership growth and a percentage of growth on an calculated on an annual basis. And after the year 2000, the trend is definitely down. On a worldwide basis, I would estimate that we will start to shrink in about 3 to 5 years. In the North American division, the decline has been more extreme, and for the last 2 years, we've had a negative growth rate. And um, some conferences in the North American division are already shrinking. So this is a problem. I don't have a perfect solution for them, but I will identify some of the factors. When we look at early Adventist history, we're dealing with people and families. We're dealing with ideas, doctrines, and expressions of ideas, their worldview. We're dealing with institutions and their history, and all of these have histories, and all have evolved over time. I'm not going to read all these words, but these are the words that terms that I see in 150 years ago in the journals. Uh, some of these terms we still use today. I'm starting to make a list of new words that I'm hearing in Adventism. But the elements of early Adventism exist in a context in the United States of industrialization, child labor, the U.S. Civil War, urbanization, and because Adventism grew up in an agrarian economy, immigration influenced us, and transportation really facilitated the spread of the Adventist Church and its ideas. And of course, literacy is very important to a church where you are publishing and you're trying to convey information. Another factor is the decline in infant mortality. And we in the old issues of the review, there's some really painful obituaries to read about a child, 1.5 years old. The Lord took our little Johnny away from us, or let us have Johnny for a short period of time. They're painful to read. There's also a decline in the number of children in a household. And again, when in an agrarian economy out on the farm, you want lots of children to do the chores. So it and I've read obituaries where the wife died and left the husband with 8 children. How do you deal with that? Uh, so the average size of a family has actually dropped down between below two. Adventism had its roots in New England and upper New York State. And if you look at the birthplaces of some of the pioneers, it's in the state of Maine and New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, and so this had an influence in how we did our theology and how we saw the world. I plotted well, first of all, the Review and Herald was first published out of Paris, Maine. So that was the first centroid or the first phase of Adventism. The second phase was when James White moved the Review to Rochester, New York. And that's where my ancestors got involved. The third phase moved to Battle Creek, Michigan, and in 1856, And there's probably a second phase where Adventism spread across the plain states. And if we look at the location of the obituaries between 1860 and 1880, and this is a sampling, it was a northern religion. There was nothing going on in the deep south, and that's worthy of a lot of research. Uh, so the basic characteristics: we were small and scattered. We had obituaries about nearly everyone published. There was a tremendous urgency in the second coming. Other theology fragmented with contentious debates through the pages of the review for a long time. And people made sacrifices for the cause. There was a very strong focus on the Sabbath, both the correct day of the week and what was proper Sabbath keeping. And there was enormous institutional candor and openness in the early pages of the review, and even the early pages of the Gleaners and the Southern Tidings. And there was an obsession with legalism, uh, a, a, a tremendous, well, I'm using too many adjectives, but there was an ignorance of grace. And it was very important that people changed their behavior to conform to the norms, and we shamed people if they didn't do that. So if I were to plot the emphasis on the correct Sabbath, it was very strong at the start of the Adventist church. The awareness of the second coming declined over time. If it is only prevalent today in some of the more conservative Adventist congregations, whereas the emphasis on Ellen White, and particularly her inerrancy, took off after her death in 1915. And an understanding of grace and the giftness of salvation really hasn't taken off until probably 1990. The first 10 issues of the Review and Herald, the lead article for the first 10 issues was all about the Sabbath. And a very significant obsession with the Sabbath. And I've kind of counted the topics in the first 12 issues of the review. But maybe it's because the audience, the perceived audience at first, were the Millerites who had already gone through the Great Disappointment. So they were already convinced of the second coming. I can't guarantee that, but I suspect it. There was a spirit of frugality. The early issues of all the journals used a small font and narrow margins, and I wonder how many people had eyesight good enough to read that stuff. So, and another doctrine or value, if you will, was legalism and the precariousness of salvation. And a lot of the obituaries talk about we think he will be saved because he was a good man. I see that so often. So where did the legalism come from? And I have to give some credit to Gil Valentine on this, because he's been talking about the puritanical New England culture that Ellen White grew up in, but also some characteristics of her personality. She was very strong-willed and not shy about giving criticism, and tended to be very blunt in those criticisms. Well, when you have the early Advent focus on the Sabbath, uh, which was kind of considered a binary issue, right or wrong, there were no nuances there, and that created a culture of Adventism where being right was very important. And there are heated arguments about rules and behavior in the pages of the review. And not only was correct behavior essential for salvation, but also for essential for the character that you have to perfect prior to the second coming. And this even extended into what the troops were reading in the youth instructor during World War II. So if there's any unity or solidifying of the doctrines of the church, Sabbath and the second coming was universally accepted, but there was a lot of debate over other doctrines through the years. There might have been some delay fatigue, but with Dallas in 1980 and the 27, uh, those were intended to be descriptive doctrinal statements, but they became used as a test of fellowship. And for many Adventists, particularly some ministers, they took on a creedal status. The images of Adventist publication say a lot about how we view the world. This is I can't see what the date is, but this is what appeared in the Youth Instructor. But back in 1944, this illustration showed two kinds of people: those who were expecting and joyful on the second coming, and this man who was in dread of the second coming because he was not ready. And images often are more influential than prose. And so, Lauren, talk about fear of being ready for the second coming. Uh, it was very prevalent. Our understanding of the judgment was not uniform. In this illustration of the judgment, which is frightening enough to begin with, Jesus is up on the podium. In this illustration, Christ is our advocate, our defender. And these two, both influential and memorable to a young mind, but there was this ambiguity as to how the judgment worked, and that's part of the midrash of Adventist literature through the years. So Gil Valentine has a wonderful expression. Her writings were idealized, sanitized, and canonized. Okay, and after her death, I would declare that four generations of Adventists have been taught the inerrancy and authority of her writings. And that has us gets us into trouble, because that idea of inerrancy, even though denied by some church leaders, has become a non-negotiable doctrine in Adventism. And any new light must not contradict what she has written as we interpret it. And that's a whole 1 hour topic. I am I am just touching on a lot of issues and parts of our history that I can't go into any depth. Uh, we wish that we had the metadata around Ellen White quotes. Metadata is a term from my field in data management. But it would be useful anytime someone quotes Ellen to know when she wrote it and the circumstances and who was the intended audience, one person or a class of people, or and not, because not all statements are created equal, and the doctrine of inerrancy prevents her from maturing over time. And Ron Grable has written a book where he discusses some of this in more depth. So again, I have to issue a disclaimer that my trend lines in a lot of these charts are my intuitive guess. Looking at the literature, um, I could I could back these up with empirical data, but that is very difficult and tedious. Maybe 4 years from now, there will be large language models where we can ask the software to do it, and it'd be much easier. So the culture of Adventism and the isolation of Adventism, there's a lot of individual behavior, the rules, the careers and life choices, diet and temperance, and this is all bundled into what I call lifestyle. We have our vocabulary and scripts of how we speak and how we behave. And we're very good at watching each other, being judgmental, and using shame when necessary. So, should you be doing that on Sabbath? How many times have we heard that? Uh, more so than other faiths, Adventism requires significant behavioral changes from most converts. And within the fold, shaming is frequently used. So correct behavior is a big part of Adventist identity. And for many members, correct behavior is essential for salvation. So we're back to that fear and precariousness of salvation. One of the biggest parts of institutional Adventism early on was publishing. Both the printing house, the writers, editors, the art department, and the distribution of materials. Internally, we distributed it by journals, but a big part of distributing literature was door-to-door selling, canvassing, or they called it the bookwork, or colportering. And there have been retail displays of Adventist literature. Um, if I were to plot uh, the number of people canvassing, at least in the United States, the curve is something like this. And Southern Tidings in 1947 listed 300 colporteurs, and today they don't list any. So what's different? Why did this go down? Well, fewer Americans are at home in the daytime when women are working more out of the home, and there's a decline in reading because reading is in competition with alternative media. So I would say the receptivity for printed media has gone down, and the competition for the attention of any audience that we want to communicate to, the competition has increased tremendously. And effective communication needs feedback. And publishing is not the best way to get feedback, which is why I like to look at the people who leave their cameras on while I'm talking and watch their faces. That gives me some feedback since we're not all in the same room. The best feedback is dialogue in a Bible study with good eye contact. In the classroom, most teachers are receptive to feedback from the students. A sermon is even less, uh, there's less feedback. Uh, Different ministers handle it different ways. But I think in publishing, we have the lowest level of really genuine feedback from the audience. And authors and editors are often in their own religious and cultural bubbles when they're writing their stuff. George Bernard Shaw said the biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place. And I think that's true about classroom sermons, publications, video productions, and even expressive art. That's a 1 hour topic. I think I talked about expression, a long time ago, maybe 6 months ago in this group. So, Adventism as a doctrinal and cognitive identity and experience has declined lately, where Adventism as a congregational community and experience has gone up. And this is very different than 100 years ago. Yet the General Conference are more focused on the doctrinal identity than the congregational identity. Uh, if you if you talk to the average member, their interest in institutions peaked out maybe in 1900, and it has gone down ever since. Whereas the focus on their own congregation has gone up in in more recent years, especially after World War II. But also the journals, the Gleaners, the Southern Tidings, uh, used to print a lot of financial detail, which the members would be interested in, the Tract Society financial statement and stuff like that. That has gone down considerably. What is replacing is stories and anecdotes about positive behavior in the church that we support and we hold as normative. So, and negative stories are seldom printed. So that's a whole hour topic. Higher education, particularly, actually, four distinct markets for education with different dynamics, different maturity levels in the students. So, youth is a too ambiguous term, especially when it's quoted when Ellen White uses the term. More recently, we've seen a significant decline in enrollment in North American Division higher education. Some schools have shown severe enrollment decline, particularly Pacific Union College, with a over the 10-year period negative. I mean, they've dropped 44%. The academies in North America are not as well attended as they used to be. And of course, the elementary schools, and this metric is per 1,000 members. In all the union conferences, the elementary enrollment has gone down. We could take an hour to unpack that phenomenon. My estimation of the causes of the decline in college enrollment, there's several, and this is an engineering technique of root cause analysis, much higher tuition, skepticism nationwide in the value of liberal arts degree or higher education in the first place. Um, North American membership has shifted to low income minorities that can't afford the tuition the way the white upper class could. There's a shift in the doctrine of salvation. It's no longer a catastrophe if your child leaves the church or marries outside the faith. There's declining market of demographics for higher education overall. There's the decline in the SDA feeder schools. We saw that chart, which one expert says is the lack of ministerial support, but also there may be a secularization of grassroots Adventism. And I've just stumbled on another unstated racial prejudice. Uh, Parents prefer to send their children to safe schools. So the higher tuition, of course, reflects higher operating costs, which may reflect better teacher pay. All of this is a 1 hour topic. I'm not going to go down that road anymore, except for one phenomenon that we've been talking about, and that's how many young men are interested in the ministry. And there was a spike right after Pearl Harbor. And if you look at college yearbooks in the during World War II, almost all the men were ministerial students. And what we've seen now is fewer men interested in the ministry, particularly pastoral work, but women are taking up the slack, at least in union conferences where they're allowed. That's another hour topic. Healthcare, a 2 hour topic. Here are some of the major sanitaria. Sanitarium, my Latin training makes me make it a when it's plural sanitaria, but sanitariums. And there was an explosion in sanitariums right after 1900. And a lot of them lasted maybe 4 to 8 years, and then they folded. And that's a whole topic of research that I don't have time to do. But sanitariums have been replaced by acute care hospitals. And so the differences, the sanitarium business model was pretty simple. Apologies, Lauren, even a minister could manage it. Uh, Whereas now you have complex corporations with highly paid professional management, government associated bond and capital financing. Income was from patients only, as far as I know about the sanitariums. Need to look at their financial statements. Whereas now it's very complex payment methods with third party payers and Medicare constraints. Each sanitarium had trained their own nurses, and they were generalists in a sense. But now there are a lot of nursing specialties with graduate degrees required. Physicians were one time employees of the hospitals, but now they're mostly independent independent corporations with contracts to the hospitals. And the sanitariums, all employees were SDA with sacrificial wages. That is such a big issue. And now very, very different wage structure with a declining percentage of SDA employees. Back then, the sanitariums used a lot of treatments developed at Battle Creek and advocated by Ellen White, whereas now we're basically mainstream medicine, drugs, and peer-reviewed science. And that's a 2-hour topic. Evangelism. Another thing. I just stumbled upon this photo in the British Advent Messenger in 1938, an evangelistic crusade, and look at the wall behind the preacher and all the beasts. This was that looks like a polar bear, not a North American black bear, but this was the symbols and the icons of our evangelism and our identity. And no, it's 5 years ago. I happened to be driving through Berrien Springs, and I drove by the village church, and look over on the left is this towering statue, the the which came right out of Daniel. Or Daniel in Revelation. Notice it fits on a trailer. It's propped up, and this is part of their evangelistic crusade. A lot of evangelism involves large number of baptistry candidates, and I've got. Do these people feel unique or lost in the crowd? And of course, evangelism. The efforts were celebrated, but retention, we don't have good measures for retention except occasional surveys. And the Adventist evangelists I've seen seldom integrated their activities with the local community, except asking for ushering support. Very wise retired physician friend of mine said that the evangelists like to work rural communities, and if you look at the location of the churches in 1914 in California, there's a lot of rural churches in the mining camps and in the agricultural area, because uh, the evangelistic tent was the only show in town, and you got a great turnout and you made lots of converts compared to being in the big city. So these images also function as symbols of our identity. Lay evangelism was encouraged, and these sketches of what would be a normative behavior for a lay evangelist uh, in dining table meetings or living room meetings, uh, and wearing your faith on your sleeve is a common thing that Adventists want to do. Now, and this was a duty for lay people. In the Central Union Reaper, 1932, was this sketch of these grave markers. And I'll just read one. Born in Africa, groped in darkness, waiting for you to tell me about Jesus, died in despair, will meet you at the judgment. Uh, Now, we could spend some time unpacking the theology here, but this is part of shaming people to do the work you wanted them to do. Even in the youth instructor is this print ad for various tools and materials you could use in living room evangelism. I'm amused that all the men are wearing coats and ties. You wouldn't see that much today. Um, just this morning, outside the Loma Linda Church, I took these pictures 90 minutes ago, is a Sabbath Keepers Motorcycle Club. And I'm really haven't talked to these people in any depth to understand just what they hope to communicate with their vests and their all their materials. So, for many Adventists, particularly in the white community, the goal of evangelism is to bring in more people just like us. The mission field, a lot of caricatures of what a good missionary is like. This one appeared in the Australian Union Record. Notice the suspenders and the necktie and the picture roll. These are icons of what we expect missionaries to do. Jan Andrews started overseas missions, and overseas is a term revealing our perspective from the United States, and the vigor of missionary activity and the number of Americans or Europeans going into foreign mission, again, a perceptive adjective, took a dip during World War II and then started to uh, taper off in recent years. The mission effort of the church was certainly enabled by the rise of NAD colleges, but there's also a decline in urgency, uh, an increase in affordable air travel, but a big factor is the decolonization of the third world and allowing them to have self-rule. And right parallel to that is the SDA leadership shifting to local people and fewer Caucasian and European folk. But the Adventist missionary activity was really benefited and facilitated by the British colonial empire, and there's a lot of stories there. We were striving to have some representation of Adventism in every country, because that's how we defined reaching the whole world, even if it was just one person in a country with 50 million people. One thing that I appreciate about um, the journals is how we honored the missionaries. This is a list of missionaries that died in the mission field or because of their uh, exposure in the mission field. This was published in the Youth Instructor in 1944. And this is typical of the risk that missionaries took, which we must recognize and honor. Um, Here are two women that were murdered in their homes while their husbands were away on itinerary. So there was a golden age of Adventist missions facilitated by higher education, the stability of colonial empires, the sense of urgency, and the generalization of skill requirements. But that faded away. Uh, there was a shift in theology in Adventism. Of course, the breakup of European colonialism, the emerging indigenous institutional leadership, and better educated local workers, and the professionalization and specialization of job descriptions. And that's a whole 1 hour topic. I think I've done it for the Asheville Forum. I don't think I've done it for this group. So back to our perception of membership growth and I showed these a little earlier, the decline in baptism rate, the decline in membership growth worldwide, which I predict in 3 to 5 years will go negative, and the decline in growth rate in the North American division. So, some additional stipulations. Official Adventist doctrine is not universally accepted by grassroots Adventist membership. So there's a difference between what we say we believe and what is really believed. And this is not always recognized by Adventist leadership. And if I were to linearize orthodoxy again, I would say that it was pretty tight back in back in the 1930s, but it has spread out today. Um, so the illusion of unity through uniformity does not accurately describe reality. A better way to express it is most Adventists believe this, but some Adventists believe differently, and to admit that there's diversity. Um, if I were teaching a class of students, of non-Adventist students, and trying to explain Adventism to them, I would want to be candid about the diversity. Now, why is this membership decline? And here I'm going to get into hot water. So I take a cold drink. There's decline in engagement, decline in school enrollment. The first, the first factor is the loss of doctrinal credibility. There's hostility to science, inerrant authority of Ellen White, ambiguous soteriology. We're not sure how we are saved, and the delay in the second coming. And these are factors that discourage many young people from staying in the church, along with social policy, how women are treated, and how discomforting minorities are treated. There's a loss of sense of community, at least conference-wide. Uh, we have declining publications, declining obituaries, and we're seeing more congregational centrism, but not conference centrism. And our message, our evangelism, is lost in a much more noisy world. And I talked about that a few months ago. Mhm. Another interesting phenomenon is the diversification of culture in Adventism. And you have this tension between the old type of worship and the new. And because of the expansion of channels and exposure to various kinds of media, including what people are hearing in the car radio and in their earbuds, you are going to find a more culturally fragmented congregation and liturgy. And so there are enormous generational differences in musical taste and expectations. I would maintain, even though it's right in front of us, that worship is intensely cultural. So there's tension between these kinds of music, and in urban areas, there's a proliferation of niche congregations, which is impossible in the middle of Kansas. I'm going to take 5 more minutes, if I may, and show another model that that I developed for the San Diego Forum, and that is a different way of dividing the Adventist experience over a time period. And I call it the 4 ages of Adventism: the primitive, the institutional, the congregational, and I should rename that the digital church. And the primitive, the very informal organization, doctrines were supreme, images of the beast, and the widespread fear of not being saved, and an emerging judgmentalism and watching each other to see if each other's sin. Institutional Adventism began in 1854, and you have the emergence of schools, publishing houses, sanitariums, and health, and all that. In that worldview or view of the church and that model of the church, congregational life wasn't that important. But after World War II and the post-war recovery in the United States and the economic boom, we saw congregations becoming more important, and a lot of money going into um, building churches and building comfortable fellowship halls and a ski boat for the youth. And this I do have metrics for. Um, if you look at the ratio of offerings to tithes in the three categories that the General Conference statistical reports show are local offerings, missions, and tithe. But if you look at the ratio of these offerings to tithe, the offerings directed to missions by the grassroots members has gone down, while the offerings for local church expense has gone up, and now is for each dollar of tithe, there's 50 cents going to the local church. This is a tremendous shift that occurred after World War II. If you just look at the total numbers, it's not going to be evident. And finally, the digital church, where affinity groups like this group are formed around culture and ideas rather than local geographic congregations, and the use of electronic and digital means. And for many congregations, they are streaming their services on video. This got a big boost during the pandemic. So the digital church exploded. I'm talking ahead of my slides. The digital church exploded during the pandemic. So this is another model that may be helpful to think about the church. And all these coexist in Adventism today. These views or perceptions of what the church ought to be coexist. Now, I got a lot more stuff, but I think I am going to stop sharing and endure the blistering critiques of the crowd.
Thank you, Michael. I would like to just venture a try at something small, just a little bit different than the usual. I wonder if those of you that use the chat, I wonder what, for Michael's benefit, what he's given us like a speed dating approach to what has happened to our denomination.
I've thrown a lot of stuff at you.
I mean, so we've seen this picture of our denomination, and I wonder what your reaction is to that. I wonder if you would put things in the chat, a word or two or three. I think my word is depressed about what I see with the denomination. But I wonder what those of you that that have something and would respond, throw something in and give Michael some feedback. Honest, okay, enlightened.
I'm ready to take notes.
Okay, it substantiates some of my observations, validating, fragmentation, don't feel connected to the denomination anymore. Church is clueless, inevitability of SDA end. I wondered about that because Michael said, in 3 to 5 years, the numbers are in terms of growth is going to go down. Well-researched. Okay, that's about the presentation. Well-researched and unbiased. Thank you. Divergence between bureaucracy and membership. You getting a feel for this, Michael? I mean, you see how people are reacting.
Yeah.
And we've got a couple of questions, but I want to ask you, and thank you for those. Irrelevance, Lauren. I should have known. I'm not.
The evil part of me wants to strike those memories of nostalgia.
Many are stuck in the past. Ed, yes. Brings back memories of simpler times when I felt like church was more than like my family. Well, your dad was the pastor. Okay, stuck in the past. The real, as my young granddaughter would say, Adventist trauma. Oh, there's an interesting perspective. Explains the conflicts or differences with other Adventists. Worried about where we're going. Indeed. That's already got a thumbs up. Our technology is equal to the best horse carriage wheels in the world. Our theology, not technology, theology. Yes, indeed.
May I say that what I hope to accomplish here is to give you tools and vocabulary to understand what you observe better and to talk about it.
Well, because see, the problem, Michael, is that virtually everyone here, I can't speak to the jobs that I don't even know who all is on here exactly. But except for those who have and who hold significant positions of authority and responsibility in the denomination, all of the rest of us feel powerless. I mean, you have shown us a picture that we feel, I think I'm not just speaking for myself, powerless to have any significant influence upon, which is a bit disturbing. But I want to, before I go to the, I'm glad we have hands up. This is good. But I want to, and those of you that are reading the chat, you can see what things are being said. I have several questions, but I'm only going to ask one now. You did not talk at all about, what do they call them? The independent ministries.
That's a
And
whole other topic.
why are they so conservative? I mean, do you just, in a word, why is it? Because they're over in that 10% column, aren't they? Mostly.
That's a sociological issue that I don't feel qualified right now to tackle.
Because that's sort of part of the big picture of our church, is it not?
Yeah.
I mean, I understand. Okay.
But you're correct. They're mostly conservative.
We've got a big group today, and Dr. Johnston, you're up first, and I'm asking you to unmute. Thank you again. Thank you again for offering our opening prayer, Bob. I appreciate that very much. So share your thoughts, your questions.
Yeah, I have a question, and I don't know whether Dr. Scofield can answer it or wants to answer it, but where are we doing well and why?
Numerically, we're doing well in a lot of ethnic minority groups in the United States. And there's some overseas areas.
You know why that is? Those groups are support groups for new immigrants. Okay.
You're making a generalization, but I think that's true in a number of those congregations. I haven't visited them much. Dr. Johnston was a respondent to me in 1982 when I spoke at the Michiana Forum. You and Dr. Oosterwald responded to my presentation. You may not remember it, but I still have scars.
Oh my.
No. You were very supportive. Thank you. I hope I answered your question, but I may not have. Okay.
George, welcome this afternoon. I've asked you to unmute. Share with us what your thoughts are.
Yeah, thank you for this presentation. It was very helpful, very educational. One aspect that concerns me a lot and has for many years is the emotional exploitation practiced by the church. The name Adventist, of course, came from the hope of the parousia, the Christ's return, but at the same time, it was associated with emotional exploitation, I call it, with the introduction of fear. Fear has been a always ever-present term in Adventism evangelism. In 1971, I was in the third year of the seminary in Seventh-day Adventist Seminary in Brazil, class of 1972. And we had a class evangelism. So we had to have a series, 6 students in each group. And we conducted an evangelistic series in local churches around the school. And I remember that the emphasis was on, let's start with something that scares people and keep them coming. And at that time, we did what the teacher said, and we were immature. I look back now and say, well, we never talked about the gospel, Jesus, love, God's love, and all that stuff. So basically, this is a comment, but the question would be, do you think there's any cure for this thing? Because the fear, the element fear has been present and still is. So how to deal with this? Is there any salvation for the church from the inside out or so? Just one point, I saw Spectrum Publishing today envisioning a post-Whitean church or something like this, an article by Dr. Hans Gutierrez. Very good, very good. Actually, Hans Gutierrez will be on a seminar this afternoon from 3 to 5 in Redlands or so, and being interviewed by Dr. David Larson. And I actually sent an email to Lauren with the information, with the link, if anyone is interested. It's difficult for me to do the chat because of my vision. But what do you think? Is there any real hope? What is needed to be changed in order to have some progress in this area? Thank you.
Well, I am aware of some emerging discussion of the ethics of evangelism. And I forget whether it was 3 or 4 weeks ago, there was a presentation at the PUC choir room class, their faculty Sabbath school class, on the very questions that you hint at about the ethics of evangelism, and that's another topic. I am sensitive to the emotions that you express. I went through academy very afraid. I didn't go to evangelistic meetings much, but we should be talking more about the ethics of evangelism.
Thank you, George. Lauren, and you can unmute yourself, but before I come to you, Dolores James has posed a question in the chat, and I just would like to recognize it now and not lose it. She asks, Michael, this is for you, doesn't every living thing have a lifespan? Is the SDA church to live forever? You created sort of a subtle implication in that regard when you talked about membership trends, because we all know the youth are leaving in droves. So what would you postulate about that? How long would it take for it to just simply disappear?
I used to work for a company before I retired that boasted of its 14% growth every year, 14% annual growth. If anyone can do the math and know that that is not sustainable. You're going to saturate the market, and your growth is going to slow down. So I don't think we've saturated any market, but I think that the slowing of growth, and I listed some of the causes, and they're in several areas, but I think the slowing of growth is certainly understandable and very foreign to our view of our own success. We were always growing. There are some communities in Orange County. They built a large church with high hopes in a suburban area. And after 10 years, they had to close down the church because they just didn't have enough members. That's inconceivable. And I will use the word triumphalistic in our triumphalistic view of how the church should be growing.
Well, just to sort of tag on to that, I work with business people, and those of us who do that, Tupperware has just gone bankrupt. I mean, will wonders never cease? This has to do with relevance. Okay. Kodak, we know what happened to them. Blockbuster board of directors years ago had an offer to be acquired by Netflix, and they said, no, we like our business model. And we all know where that ended up. The last Kmart with the blue light is closing in the United States. I mean, relevance is an issue, and it's not just limited to business. And I think that's what we're talking about here in some respects. And you're muted, Michael. I want to hear what you're saying.
Which argues, I have a little bit of a coughing, which argues for examining, is is what worked 100 years ago, or what is even the text, even the books, even the literature, what worked 100 years ago, is that going to work in the modern secular audience?
Exactly. All right, Lauren, thank you. Let me come to you. Appreciate your patience.
Oh, this is excellent. Michael, I'm going to kind of say what I think I've been trying to do with Adventist today, and probably as a pastor as well. So it seems clear to me that the direction that the top leaders in the church are going is not a direction that's really going to save the church, the part of the church that I'm in. Now, maybe it's effective in Latin America, maybe it's effective in South Asia. I just don't know. It does not seem effective to me. And so I keep trying to come up with a picture of the church that preserves some of my nostalgic notions of what it could be. The things that are good, that we can hold on to, that we like, while throwing out the things that really are harmful. And I am absolutely convinced that the notion of everybody going after us to persecute us is totally rancid. It is a horrible, horrible, awful idea. So things like that need to be thrown out.
That's one of the paranoia that I talked about a few weeks ago.
Well, yeah, it's totally conspiratorial and paranoid. So I guess we kind of sit around trying to find a way of loving the good stuff about our church, while at the same time rejecting a whole bunch of stuff that just doesn't work anymore. And
Yeah.
it hurts in a way. We don't want to do that. We don't want to be negative. But what is going to be left when this all gets shaken out?
Yeah.
Because the
And
fact
so,
of the matter is, you said people are becoming more oriented to congregations. That may be true in comparison to being oriented to the general conference. But the fact is that congregations are dying like crazy out here in the middle of the country. You
mhm,
could go to probably 9 out of 10 of the congregations in Ohio and find less than 30 people there.
yeah.
Uh, they're just dying. It's not true in Southern California, but it's true out in this what you guys call the flyover country.
Oh, no, 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 no. There's some congregations in Southern California that are struggling,
Yeah.
and even my own congregation in Orange County. I think what this group of people need to do is to identify those aspects of Adventism, both theological and lifestyle, that you can be excited about,
Hmm.
and create a list, and at the bottom of the list are the things that you're not excited about. By the way, nostalgia is so significant and such a factor that we don't even recognize it. And I think a lot of people at the GC are nostalgic for their upbringing. I remember there was one man, I won't name him. I think he went to Mount Vernon Academy. He was eventually disfellowshipped, but he was so nostalgic for his academy experience that he formed an organization to support Adventist education, which was, to me, it didn't work.
Mm.
There was a disconnect there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Mhm.
we need to be better at spotting nostalgia, and it's maybe underneath the surface of people that are speaking in committee meetings and things like that. Very powerful. And
Yeah,
I understand it. I'm
I do
nostalgic for
too.
some things. Yeah.
I do too. One of Elder Wilson's very close associates, who's a friend of mine, he said, if you want to understand Ted Wilson, he said, you have to realize that Ted Wilson is trying to create the church of the 1950s and 1960s when he grew up. And he couches it in terms of historic Adventism. He couches it in terms of doctrines. But really what he's after is that era of the strong institution and the people gathered together and the sort of fantasy notion that everybody believed and practiced back then.
And
And he said, if you really want to understand him, that's the line you have to pursue.
and ambiance,
Oh, yeah,
would that be a good word?
yeah.
There's another word that I can't find, but ambiance. By the way, Linda, I hope someone's going to capture all these comments in the chat, because and email them to me, because they're going faster than I can read them.
We will, it does record them. We usually don't release them, but I will send them to you if you send me a reminder.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
But thank you. This was very good. Now, the only thing I would quibble with a little bit is I don't think that there's been a decline in interest in the second coming. I think that it's
I got to
strong.
redraw that curve. Yeah. Yeah.
It's very strong.
But well, it's distributed. It's the view of the second coming is very strong in the Orthodox, and I mean every catastrophe is another sign of the end. The September 11, just the pandemic, another sign of the end. It won't be long now. For many Adventists, that is very strong. But in the bubble I'm in Loma Linda, where we're doing a 10-year, 15-year plan, you don't do long-range planning in that kind of expectation.
Well, like you say, we have a lot of brick and mortar in our denomination.
I've come to realize, Michael and Linda, that the experience of those of you who are around hospitals and big universities is entirely different from the experience of those of us who worked in the middle of the country.
I'll admit, I'm in a bubble. I try to get out of it once a week, and I go to Redlands.
Oh my. really stepping out of your comfort zone, I guess, there. Well, we think it's bad, but some of my family lives out there. We think California is all homogenous.
Get out of his bubble. I think it's a conservative church.
Yeah, there's I know at least of one where my sister belongs, and she couldn't be up on the podium at all unless she wore a white dress. So yeah, not making this up. Can't make this up. So Ed, where are you? There you are.
I'm somewhere.
I can't see your face. There you go.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I got my screen lowered.
All right.
So
that's better than your standards, though, Ed. Better to lower your screen, not your standards. So what provocative thought have you got for us this afternoon?
Well, I got to take your admonition to heart. Fascinating presentation, Michael. I suspect there's some astonishment around some of the data, particularly the decline in the growth rate of Adventism. That's pretty contrary to the official pronouncements that we hear. And it's been a really good analysis of the past and current trends, kind of like our analysis of Ellen White that we've been carrying on for the last 50 years, since the 70s, which is a pretty good retrospective But perhaps, like on the matter of Ellen White, we're not really very good at coming up with alternative perspectives. We just seek to understand where we've been. And I've spent 30 years as a consultant, mostly on strategic initiatives for my clients. And it's natural for me to say, okay, yeah, but then what's next? Where do we go from here? And for us, what strategies should have priorities as we look at our realities? And I asked myself, what would appeal to the marketplace of spirituality? There is a marketplace out there for Christianity and a broader market for spirituality, if we can use that term. And we face a changing marketplace where we know that religious observance is declining in most first world countries. Membership is declining in churches, Christian churches in most first world countries. We see the rise of the nuns who have a desire for spirituality but don't really want a creed necessarily or a formal denomination. And so I ask myself, if we're trying to be evangelizing, how do we talk to those people? Or do we just talk to the declining number of people who would give the Bible some credibility? And so
Yeah.
we may be talking in terms that fewer people think about.
Oh, we're using a vocabulary that that's archaic.
Yeah. So I'm interested in your thoughts on looking down the road. What changes in Adventism would stabilize it? I know some changes in Adventism would destabilize it, and maybe we have to go through that experience to come out the other side. But what changes could we make that on the long run would be stabilizing to our church and make it more attractive to that person out there that's interested in spirituality? And part of that
Yeah.
might be, how do we rationalize the concept of soon? How many GC sessions have we heard it said that we will not have another one because Jesus will come?
Oh, yeah.
Uh,
And you've
and-
asked several questions there.
yeah, I'll quit.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off. Uh, Again, make a list of what you like about Adventism. Uh, and part one exercise related to that is, first of all, if you had a secular friend in outside of Adventism, would you bring them to church with you?
No.
And boy, I'm seeing heads shake. Okay, what would make the church ideal that you would bring them to church with you? And that, see, I keep asking these 1 hour questions because that's a big topic. But also, when you're trying to communicate to the secular mind, why not start with dialogue and eye contact? And then you'll know where to go when you get immediate feedback. In fact, ask leading questions and then sit and listen. What's important to them? How do they see the world? How do they see their death? That's doing it one-on-one, not in a broadcast mode, but one-on-one. Does that make sense?
Yes, as maybe a partial answer.
Yeah. Oh no, it's not everything.
In my lifetime, there have been two people that have startled me with their statements that they were getting baptized because of me.
Wow.
I did not have a clue. I never talked to any of those people about my
Mhm.
beliefs or my church or my denomination or their spiritual life. It was a shock to me, both times.
How interesting. Yeah.
Presumably, they were not members of your family.
No, they were not.
That deserves digging into. Very interesting. Yeah. Um, One of my fundamental rules for my life is, am I making the world better for the people that I come in contact with? And that's how I got involved in this, trying to explain the church, is if people understand the systemic causes of what frustrates them about the church, maybe they can be more at peace. And I want to heal uh, discomfort and fear and agony. And I hope I do that with these kind of lectures.
Yeah. Let me just say this and I'll get off. I have a feeling that part of the answer might lie in an adoption of the perspective by the church that our first job is to promote the concepts of the kingdom of heaven is now.
Good.
That we have been too focused on a kingdom somewhere down the road. Meanwhile, the world falls apart around us. And I just wonder if what would happen if we would change our focus to say, okay, we're creating God's kingdom on earth. And I mean, Jesus kind of told us to do that.
Oh, yeah.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Samuel, welcome. I'd like you to unmute so that you can join the conversation.
It's done.
Yes, there you go. Thank you. Welcome. Where are you speaking to us from today?
I'm calling from Fond du Lac, Wisconsin.
Okay, very good. Well,
Can you hear me?
yes, we can.
Yeah,
We can hear
Sam's an old friend of mine.
you. Okay, excellent. Well, Sam, what's on
Well,
your
fine.
mind this afternoon?
What's on my mind? I'm delighted to see my old professor, Dr. Johnston. Thank you for the comments before. You have mentioned about feeling powerless as a layperson. I've been a son of a pastor for 62 years, and a pastor myself in the Adventist church for 35. Clergy are just as powerless. Sometimes it takes a retirement for people to be able to say what they want. What I want to say, instead of saying it, I want to ask the speaker a question. Because the title of this meeting was 180 Years of Waiting for the Second Coming. From Anderson all the way to down to Nathan Grain, who have concretized some of the biblical concepts. So we are expecting, Adventists are expecting somebody to come from the sky. And so my question to Michael Scofield, maybe it's outside of his area of expertise, even though I'm sure that he's got his thoughts on this. What is your concept of heaven?
Oh, that's hard to imagine, because we are given to a very spatial and material world. And I mean, heaven may be where I can eat all the chocolate ice cream I want, or it's having rich, uh, handed relationships and friendships and interactions with the saints that I admire. Uh, that's off the top of my head. That's what I would say. But I don't think that much about heaven, because there's so much good that I can encounter here, and there's so much good I need to do here. That
Thank
fits
you.
in.
I was really thinking about the location, because most of the conversation is on the timing and when, but the location, I think, is important. Heaven is obviously, starting from the top of my head and upwards, for trillions of light years. And for the past 5 billion years, humans have been looking up when their eyes could only see trouble with no solution around them. And still today, the child in me and the child in us looks up to a heavenly parent someplace. But the question of where exactly a Jesus would come back from, without socks, is a place that's trillions of light years of oxygen-less, freezing, radiation-filled, toxic, empty space. And so that's a question that I think is relevant for me. And that's just a crack in the door, because I know that my time is limited on this platform. But I'm thankful for being able to say that, and ask if you have ever thought of that. We have around the globe people that either believe in Santa Claus, or in some people having heaven. But now, since the 1990s, you have mentioned the digital age church, but I mean post-spatial age. And I'm just wondering how this all makes sense for a bunch of grown-ass people. That's my honest question.
Okay. I have learned to tolerate late in life not knowing things and not being sure about things. And I have also observed that one of the advantages of Adventist evangelism is that it appeals to people who want to be very sure about things. And I have friends that are parsing scripture severely, arguing, did this happen, or and that is in the grand tradition of Adventism. There was a series of articles. Oh, and now I forget, but it was in the 19th century in the Review about the detailed list of all that happens in the investigative judgment, event by event by event, and all that was speculative. And rather, we may not be sure about things like that, but I am very sure about the existence of God and the goodness of God. And I have to just be comfortable not being sure about a lot of other things.
Thank
Lauren?
you. But
Okay.
I
I saw him unmute for a second.
have heard it said that people who become Christians solely because of their desire to go to heaven will probably not make it, simply because it's about relationships. It's not about a place. Michael, I see you nod your head that you've heard that too.
Yeah.
Or some derivation thereof.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Bob Johnson, you're back with us again.
Yeah,
Please.
forgive me for troubling you again.
No, welcome.
I'm going to say something that's a little counterintuitive and possibly unpleasant. Back in 1972, Dean Kelly published a book called Why Conservative Churches Are Growing. I'm not sure whether he could publish the same book today. From what I read in Christianity Today, even evangelicals are losing their young people, but I don't know, maybe not. Certainly liberal churches aren't doing any better either. Paranoia sells. The last election proved that. But another thing that sells is a way of life. Every strong religion develops a culture. There's an Adventist culture, particularly in our centers, at least in our centers, in the educational centers, and places like that. And it's attractive to some people. There's a person who attends the Sabbath school that I attend here, Sabbath school class, who calls himself a Seventh-day atheist. He likes Adventist culture. He just doesn't believe in God. There are people who are even attracted to Amish and conservative Mennonite stuff. They like the lifestyle. That's kind of a certain kind of person that likes that.
Or if I may interrupt, or
Yes.
is what they find attractive community.
Yes, but there are lots of communities.
Right. But a community where they're comfortable with the common ideas and glue that hold the community together.
That's true. Another thing that helps, I think somebody like Herbert Bloomstead or even Ben Carson is worth more than 10 evangelists. What we need is more Adventist heroes. We don't have many, but it's people like that that attract certain kinds of people. I can name a number of young Adventists who are musicians who like music, who have stayed in the church just because of Herbert Bloomstead. I believe I know them. Another thing is when we emphasize way of life, we're thinking of things like the blue zones and all that kind of stuff. I think the Sabbath is more attractive than the sanctuary doctrine. Adventist diet is more attractive than soteriology. Our anthropology is more attractive than some other things. And so I think the more we concretize our way of life and the more attractive we make our way of life, the more appealing our culture is, the more success we will have. Now, you mentioned community, but we're in competition with other communities. There is less and less brand loyalty among our young people. The young people tend to hang out together with people of other churches, and they go to the one that is most attractive in their particular town where they live. At least that's the way it is in a lot of places. And that puts us into competition, not with other Adventist churches, but with the community church down the road, with the Baptist church.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That means we have to strengthen our local congregations. There's a very successful church in Granger, Indiana, which is a suburb of South Bend. It's basically a Methodist church, but it doesn't advertise itself as a Methodist church. It's called Granger Community Church. They have a sanctuary, a meeting place where the congregation gathers. They also have a book, a lounge, a bookshop, a snack bar, and they've made themselves a place that's attractive for people to hang out. I don't want to keep talking, but there are things that we can do, and there are places and things that succeed. Unfortunately, paranoia is one of them.
Yeah. Have you noticed that some Adventist congregations, and this may be a decision made by a charismatic pastor, have removed the word Seventh-day Adventist from their name?
Mhm.
Yeah, and a lot of places don't call themselves churches anymore. They call themselves worship centers or growth center or something like else. They just don't use the word church.
Yeah, and the courthouse is a justice center now. Give me a break.
Well, and I hate to use the phrase perfume on a pig, but Bob, the difference, I think, between the cultural places you're describing other denominations have and ours is that you, in order to appreciate and feel a part of our culture, tell me if you think I'm wrong, is that you have to know the language. And I say this because my husband is not a Seventh-day Adventist, but he participates in Sabbath school because I chum him. I take him to lunch afterward. We made that agreement. So he comes with me to Sabbath school. And when I ask him afterwards, what did you think? Well, he goes, it's a lot of shop talk. I mean, it's words
Okay,
and
yeah.
phrases
Mhm.
and stuff. And he's a good, I mean, he impressed my children so many years ago when he beat them at Bible tic-tac-toe. So it's not like he doesn't know anything about the Bible, but we have our own vocabulary. And I think that is somewhat of a barrier for people to come in and ultimately feel comfortable. Don't you agree? Oh, Bob, you muted. Let me unmute you again. Unmute, Bob. I want you to respond to that.
Okay. Well, I agree that our jargon can be very off-putting unless we explain it. I read The Economist, and whenever they name somebody, even though we think they're well known, they always say who they are. That's part of their style. Whenever they use a technical term, they always explain it. That's an intellectual language, The Economist.
Mhm.
And
I'm a big believer in footnotes.
yeah, well, when it's oral communication, you can't just put it in a footnote unless you supply a glossary to every new attendee or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me say one more thing. Worship style. There's something that we call contemporary worship style that has worship teams and guitars and drums. The trouble is, conservative is becoming contemporary has a way of becoming uncontemporary as time passes. We have cohorts that move through life together, and what was contemporary when they were young is contemporary for them when they're older. I was interested to discover that in the UK, we're losing our young people. You know what they're going to? Greek Orthodox. Ancient liturgy is in again.
Yeah, that's culture.
Mhm. Yes, it is. Thanks, Bob. Appreciate your comment. I'm glad you came back in for that. We were glad for it. Susan Newman, welcome. Glad to see you. What are you thinking this afternoon?
Well, I was raised a pastor's kid, made well known that my great aunt was Rachel Harris Oates Preston. And so I kind of, I would say, grew up with definitely a conservative background, taught for the denomination for 25 years, went to all Adventist schools, and then did teach in a public school for 11 years. And during that time, I was able, because as a teaching at Adventist school, sometimes it takes everything from you, so you can't get involved in a whole lot of other things beside what you're doing with a boarding academy. But I can say when I started, really was able to get more involved in church activities. And I found at my church, this is south of Baltimore, that there were Adventists that were out of the church, were walking back into the church and doing more with greeting beside handing out a bulletin, brought about baptisms and things. And a concern that I did see growing was that there wasn't follow-up with those people. So it was one thing to have these people join the church, but unless you really had a good support system, they would eventually not show up again. That was a concern at that church. Now I'm down in the Chattanooga area at a contemporary church, and I chose it not because I can say I'm 100% on the hyper contemporary level. However, I can say for my church, I can literally take and I have taken homeless people into the church and nobody raises an eyebrow. You do not have to wear any special thing or do any special thing. There is a sort of a brunch available, and there's a lot of issues that go along with that kind. I mean, with people that are coming in, but even in this church, there are people, I can say just in the last year, like 3 people that have been out of the church for 20 years walk back in the church because they felt safe to walk in. Now, sometimes people, because we are fairly contemporary, they go to one of the more conservative churches in the area at some point. But the fact is, I like being at a church where anyone can walk in, no matter what they've been through, what they've gone through, and they feel comfortable coming in. And it's a joy for me to be at a church like that, because to be able to welcome these people, and interesting enough, several of them have been pastors' kids that have been out of the church, conservative family raising. So I don't know the answer to these things that have been presented, but I will say I've seen it all in my lifetime, and it's who we have been. It's who we are right now. I don't know the answers. I do know that following up with individuals, and we've had several of the young people from Southern come over and say they've tried a lot of the other churches in the area and they felt the most welcome in our church. Now I don't know all the reasons for that, but I know one thing is I work to try to get them involved in our production program or whatever it is that they're interested, and follow up with them, even if it's just texting them, just try to immediately get them connected and doing something. And I think it's, we can talk a lot about exactly how we present ourselves theologically and on all these things, but I think there is a hunger right now that I see that people that have been out of the church starting to think, hey, there's maybe something going on. It may be getting close to the second coming. I think I need to really make sure, and I think I'm ready to take a step back in. But they may be concerned if they have to step back into an ultra-conservative church that is going to make them feel like they need to turn around and go back out the door. And I guess that's just where I'm thinking today.
Thank you. You've raised an important issue. Michael, while you're thinking about your response, let me just sort of pile on here. A man named Nicholas, and I wasn't sure how to pronounce his last name, posted in the chat sometime earlier today. He said, we progressives need to have our own ministries and outreach. I mean, it almost sort of goes along with what Susan is saying. Michael, have you, in response to her thoughts, have you seen anything, aside crosswalk has been mentioned here, and perhaps more will be said about that. But have you seen things that can be done that those of us progressives might engage in?
Yeah, crosswalk is such a remarkable experience. There's so much energy, and I'm still studying it. I'm still trying to grasp it all. But something that one of my friends was on a summer exercise out of the seminary. He was down in the South, and one of the exercises was to try to survive for a week without any cash. And he went to the Adventist church, and he was dressed scruffily, and he made them very uncomfortable. And so there is a comfort level of appearance and behavior, not just ideas, but first appearances that needs to be there for people to both the congregation to feel comfortable with a visitor, but also the visitor to sense the comfort level of the congregation. And if that's not there, they're gonna turn around and walk out. And I haven't been in that situation of dressing poorly and going to an Adventist church. It might be an interesting experiment. But what you mentioned about the homeless people, my goodness, that's a whole other topic. How do we deal with them? And I remember the Loma Linda University Church was considering services for the homeless people on the church campus, and that made some members very uncomfortable. And so the services for the homeless people are done out there in the inner city where the homeless people are to be found. That's a short answer to a longer question. I that's all I can come up with off the top of my head.
But I want to ask Susan a question before you mute again. Susan, based on your experience, and Michael, I'll just pose this to you too. Is it possible? I'm sure this is going to be an overgeneralization, but is it possible that Adventist congregations tend to have the collective view that people that come and join us are fortunate to be with us, and that we don't really have to extend ourselves toward them in any particular way? Is, again, that's a bit of hyperbole, but I think you see what I'm saying. Is, in your experience, have you seen that or feel that?
Yeah, because obviously I've been in a lot of different churches through my life, and I guess I really worked through some of those, trying to understand those things especially in my church that was right south of Baltimore. And what I learned, and I just stumbled on this because I'm an introvert. So the pastor said I needed, because we had such a few members, that I need to be in charge of greeting. And I said, well, that's probably not my best thing. But anyway, he said, well, we need you to do it. We need you to do it. I said, okay, I'll do it. So, but what I found was that I was working with second level greeting. And that is, I got a really good person that was, real vivacious and had lots of whatever to say when people walked in the door and got their bulletin or whatever it was we were signing in. And then I followed up with them. In other words, whoever came in new, I wanted to get their information and just talk to them. I know, like, one lady had come that had been to 4 other churches in the DC area asking for Bible studies, and nobody followed up. I got her engaged right that day with someone that was going to give them, and other times I did them myself. But I would also try to get them connected to the pastor. In other words, I would get the information so that there was something to do. And I had a team that would follow up, so they didn't just know one person. And I made sure that they got connected to people. I think we have to have that I believe, and I make a habit of this, as every Sabbath before I go to church, is to pray, who do you want me to connect with today? I'm not real good at picking out those people, but God knows, and he puts them right in front of me or somewhere. So I do connect with them. And I find that I think we try to think of things that necessarily we can come up with. And my prayer is for our church and our churches and I'm trying to even inspire that with people at my church too, to actually pray for that connection. So when that person comes in the door, you already have the Holy Spirit working with that, and then follow through. And it may be because we don't actually have a bulletin. We send out a newsletter on Thursday. So I can ask people, what is your email address? I can get you, would you like the newsletter? And they say, oh, sure. So then I can get their phone number and then I can follow up with them. And it's like, no, it's not 100%. You don't, it doesn't make an amazing thing every time, but I can tell you there have been significant things. And I've started this with my neighborhood too. And it's like, I feel like that there's so many things we can do that is not just going into some evangelistic program. I mean, I was raised on Daniel and Revelation, all the pictures and everything, and it's like, I needed to actually start ministering myself in a personal way. And that's what makes me solid in my beliefs in this church, is because I see what can happen.
It's a little like Ephesians 2:10, where, to paraphrase, it says that God has planned opportunities that he's created for us. And so you're just actualizing those. You're praying not to miss those as they come through.
Yes.
Michael, do you want to add on?
You've triggered a hobby horse of mine, and there are two concepts. One is situational awareness, and the other is empathy. And I do a worship talk in the classroom where I describe the woman touching the hem of Christ's garment. And he is the gold standard of empathy, and who touched me in spite of all the jostling around. He sensed that there was somebody hurting. And I strive to be able to look at people's faces and recognize when they're hurting and then act accordingly. That's something we want. For example, in chaplains, in hospital chaplains, I asked Jim Green once, "Do you have an objective test for listening skills for for your chaplain candidates?" Because not all of I know one that washed out because she was a horrible listener. Okay, she wanted to preach, not in chaplaincy. Listen, and so I think one characteristic of a model Christian is to be able to sense when people are hurting and take some action and do it in an effective, non-judgmental dialogue. Does that answer, Linda? Does that answer the? Okay.
I think it does. I really think it enriches it and builds it out. Yes. Thank you. Before we go on, we have a few more hands. And thank you, Susan. Thank you for your comments and sharing your personal experience. Lauren, do you want to say something about next week for us?
Yeah. Let me just say, Susan, I appreciate that. Here's what struck me as you were speaking is that we often talk about what the church of the future should look like in terms of doctrines or music or whatever, church administration, leadership, preaching. You testify to the fact that there's always an appreciation for personal attention and personal interest in people. It doesn't matter what else is going on. People respond to that. Let me just let you know that next week we are having a new teacher again, new to the class, not new to me. Somebody I know and Bob Johnston knows, a fellow named Skip Bell. Skip was in charge of the D-Min program at the seminary for a long time. Skip wrote me a note. He's going to, we need to refine a little bit more, but he says, I want to focus on the ecclesiology of the church. And he said, I want to look at both the vertical and horizontal perspectives of our community and mission challenge. So I'm going to get into who we are, how we organize, practical application of doing this. And he said, this speaks directly to our identity, who we are. It's going to be titled An Appeal to Renew Spiritual Community. So goes along with his specialty of preaching, of teaching pastors and helping them to be better pastors. So this is going to be interesting. Introduce Skip to this group. And so I'm looking forward to that. Thank you very much, Michael, as always. And by the way, you had the highest attendance here for this topic that we have had for a number of weeks. So people really have been tuning into this. We were close to 150, and then plus about 20 or 30 listening on Facebook. So very strong attendance. So
Because
yeah.
I use a lot of primary colors.
I think that's it. So yeah, Arthur, go ahead. I'm done.
And I'm going to have to bail pretty soon. So
Yeah, that's fine. We can quit at any time. 3:30 is about the time, and if we want to talk a little past that, we can. But you go when you have to.
Let's give it another 10 minutes, maybe.
All right.
Michael, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm sure you've heard the story of Carl Jung, who was asked by somebody, "Do you believe in the existence of God?" And Carl looked bewildered and shook his head and said, "Believe? Believe? No, I know that God exists." I wish there had been a follow-up question in that story. The follow-up question being why? Was it some sort of mystical experience that you had during your lifetime? Was it being a PK and just accepting what you were told as a PK and growing up believing in God? So you just kept believing in God. I noticed that you made the statement today that you believe in the existence of God. So with Carl, can you share with us why?
Oh my. I am blown away with I don't want to use the word miracle too often, but the complexity of life. You look at the chart on the wall of metabolic pathways. How did this happen from a spark in a puddle? You look at cell division. You look at, every cell of our body is slightly different than the one next to it. How is that directed? Well, it's in the DNA, I guess. How could that have just happened? That to me is a very overwhelming argument for the existence of a divine creator.
Where did you go to get those kind of thoughts? Did you go into reading the writings? Did you go into other kind of spiritual writings, maybe from the Eastern?
No, hanging around the School of Medicine and look up on the second floor of Griggs Hall is this incredibly complex metabolic pathways chart with all these enzymes and proteins in dynamic balance. The sheer complexity of life, and then watching the video of a cell division, and that cell division, the two resulting cells are slightly different. Wow, how did that happen? That to me, yeah, go ahead.
It sounds like that's a scientific answer to the question.
Yeah, I'm a physics major. Sorry.
Oh, what about us philosophy majors?
You have your own struggles.
All right. Thank you, Arthur. Michael, do you have a couple more minutes that I can?
Yeah, I'm seeing one more or two more. Yeah, go ahead.
Andreas, happy to see you. Asking you to unmute.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the presentation. 180 years of disappointment. I'm just wondering, and going in a slightly different direction, Adventists have been overtaken far and left and right in regards to the expectation of a soon coming of Jesus by other denominations now. And they have been overtaken left and right in terms of Sabbath theology. In Europe, there's a lot of Sabbath theology around in the Protestant world at the moment. Very fascinating stuff. Now, one of the great Baptist thinkers here in Germany had suggested some years back that maybe the denominational boundaries that are so dear and important to us will lose more and more relevance in the future. And I'm wondering whether you would like to comment, because what I noticed, maybe I should add that, I noticed that our concern in many of the ATSS lectures have been about our own denomination, as if we were the center of the universe, so to speak.
Mhm.
Maybe we are for some, but
Mhm.
just skipping denominational boundaries altogether and focusing on what is important to us, whether it be Christ and Christ alone, or let's add the Sabbath or the Second Advent. Wouldn't that be a way to go forward? Just wondering how you would comment. Thank you.
The dissolving of denominational boundaries has got to scare a lot of traditional Adventists spitless.
Sure.
I mean, that is so foreign to our worldview. We may be delighted to be ratified by a theologian in another denomination, but my goodness, part of our identity is our uniqueness and our separateness, and we would loathe to give that up. That's very interesting what you've shared with us.
Well, but you showed very clearly in your sociological insights that many of these unique points are not that important anymore, but community and fellowship is important. So
Yeah,
I
and
hear what you're saying.
I am an amateur sociologist. I have no training. I'm using the Yogi Berra method of research. You can see a lot by looking.
Yes, we used to call it common sense, but thank you anyway. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Andreas. A provocative question. Samuel, you were in line and have the last question. And let me offer you to unmute here.
And Michael, thank you for being patient here. This will be the last. We'll let you go.
Thank you. Quit while I'm ahead.
Yes.
There you go.
Could you let me unmute on the phone rather than on the
I don't have a means to do
on the one
that,
where you see me, please?
We don't have any control over that.
but we can hear you.
You can hear you.
Okay. Okay. So I was not going to raise my hand a second time, but one of the participants asked me to share and then urged me to share comments that I put it in the chat. I'm not hearing myself now because I'm on this, but here there was the comment. God exists, and quote unquote Satan too, if you want. But in saying this, I think I cannot speak for Carl Jung, and certainly not because he's deceased, neither with Michael Scofield. But I think that I'm in the same line of thought, except perhaps for the mention of creator. God exists, and quote unquote Satan too, but not as a concrete white bearded male somewhere in space. Instead, in the heavenly hemispheres of your brain, and likewise, Mike, at every level in the universe. Therefore, the biblical concepts of investigative judgment, the millennium, quote unquote salvation, and quote unquote the resurrection may still retain universal existential meaning. And the next sentence is a little sad, but it says like this: but curiously, most religionists of all stripes around the globe, and even those that consider themselves enlightened, were so indoctrinated from and since childhood that they apparently cannot adjust to this. There was a large attendance today because the title included the second coming. The next one, which is on ecclesiology, as much as I love my dear Skip, who gave me an award for my doctoral dissertation, may not be as well attended because, as John the Baptist says, he must increase, I must diminish. I am now, after 35 years as a Seventh-day Adventist pastor, I am now a hospice chaplain in a secular medical corporation, one that is both humanist, agnostic, and a Seventh-day Adventist kid.
Thank you, Samuel, for sharing your experience.
That was
Michael?
not a question.
I missed the question.
You did, because there was no question.
Oh, okay. That was a comment then.
Yes. Thank you for sharing, Samuel. Michael, any closing remark you want to make? We so appreciate your coming.
No, I stopped halfway through my slide deck because I had a lot more material, but I have charity. I have charity on my friends.